Hello everybody, and welcome to a slightly different video today. I am behind the wheel of the current Porsche 718 Boxster GTS 4.0L, and you could see this as something of a follow-up video to my piece I did on the Cayman GTS 4.0L, a car which I wasn't really in love with, and many of you were quick to tell me I was definitely wrong about. But in today's video, we're not really going to be doing a strict review of this car, because in truth, most of what I have to say about it, both good and bad, would be the same as for the Cayman. However, today we're going to be discussing that review in particular, a few things I've noticed, a few of the reasons that review came out the way that it did, and also we're going to be talking in more detail about what handling, and more importantly feel, actually means in a car, and going through some of the terms that I might use when I'm describing or road testing a vehicle and what they really actually mean. Something I probably should have done an awfully long time ago, but just never really got around to. And as the topic for today is learning, I'm very happy to say that this video has been sponsored by Skillshare, so a big shout out to them, and a little bit now about what they do. Skillshare is an amazing online repository filled with exciting and educational classes on everything from gardening to playing the guitar. I'm frequently asked how it is that you go about the process of making videos for YouTube and running your own channel, and the truth is Skillshare is the perfect place to learn all of those kind of disciplines. Today's video I want to show you is from Linda and David, and they'll tell you how to create great quality video footage from an iPhone. It's very easy to think with YouTube that there's a real cost of entry because you'll need thousands of pounds of camera kit to get anywhere, and the simple fact is that's not true. A lot of the big YouTube friends that I have actually use nothing more than their mobile phone for many of their videos. I choose to spend lots of money on camera kit because I love it, but you don't need to. Skillshare is a kind of all-you-can-learn knowledge buffet, and the best part is the pricing. It's simple and it's pretty cheap. In fact, an annual subscription works out at less than $10 a month. And the first 1,000 people to sign up using my link in the description down below will also get a completely free trial. So, that's a bit about Skillshare, and now back to the video. As mentioned, this is pretty much the convertible equivalent of the Cayman GTS 4.0L that I road tested not too long ago. Now in that video I said that the Cayman came across as a little bit of a disappointment for two primary reasons: the steering and the suspension, and so very many people told me that I was definitely wrong. Now, a few people who jumped into the comment section said that they owned cars pretty much like this, and I'm very grateful to those people because I always really appreciate real-world owners' perspectives. As has been pointed out, I didn't get very long with the Cayman, and that's not really my fault. Most manufacturers that I work with insist on giving me a car for at least a few days. In fact, the shortest generally is sort of a weekend, so drop off Friday, collection on Monday. Unfortunately, because they have a fairly small press fleet and very high demand, Porsche don't tend to give cars out for all that long. And when I have worked with them, I've had to collect usually 2 cars in the morning and return them in the afternoon. As you can appreciate, that doesn't give me a whole heap of time. People said that in the last review I got things wrong because the weather wasn't right, I didn't have long enough with the car, and I had the wrong tyres on. Well, I can answer 2 of those points, I think, fairly well right now. First off, the weather. Well, yeah, it wasn't a great day, it was a little bit cold and damp and everything, but this is Britain. We're used to that, and I've driven plenty of other cars in similar conditions to have a pretty good feel for what something should be like, even when things aren't really ideal. So that, I don't think, can count against the car. Tyres was the other big one. The Cayman and this are both fitted with Pirelli P0s, and a lot of people were quick to tell me that these aren't really a great tyre, and generally speaking, I'd probably agree. I personally always prefer a Michelin over a Pirelli. I think right about now they are the tyre of choice. However, this is a press car. This is a Porsche UK official press car. This is how they send a car out to tell all us journalists exactly what one of these should be like. So the fact that they've chosen to fit Pirelli P0s to it means that they're happy that this car is correct. If there was such a big difference between the two, really, Porsche shouldn't be fitting Pirellis to them at all. That is beyond my control. Many people also then told me that, well, nearly every other journalist disagreed with me, and they thought I was wrong because, you know, Henry Catchpole said it was brilliant, Harry Metcalf said it was brilliant. Well, here's the thing about my reviews. If there's a car coming out that I know I've got a chance of reviewing or that I want to review, I will actively avoid reading or watching anything about it. I hate spoilers. I don't want anybody else's opinion of a car to colour my own, which means that when you see my opinion, when you see my video, it pretty much is genuinely untainted by others. If I have seen something which I think could influence my opinion, I will always make sure to tell you and just be honest about it, because that's really the only thing I can actually ever do, isn't it? Since my Cayman piece, I then went and watched Henry Metcalf's video because I love his videos too. He's one of the YouTubers that I do watch on a pretty regular basis. It's a very different style of video to the ones that I make, but I really enjoy his stuff. I've always loved his work since the Evo days. Now, there were a few things in that video that I found odd. The one that I really would like investigating more is the weight figure that he got for this car, because he put it on his scales. The fact he does that in his videos is something I greatly admire. And he came back with a weight figure of 1,280 kilos. But here's the thing. Porsche claim this weighs about 1,400. It's pretty damn rare, if not nearly never heard of, for a manufacturer to overstate the weight of a car. And that's not really, you know, them cheating or being naughty or anything. The amount of options you can stick on a car like this means that there is no one fixed weight of these things. It just doesn't happen. With certain manufacturers, for example Lotus, you will get variances between two cars of identical specifications simply because the fiberglass panels will all weigh slightly different amounts, and that can add up to sort of 10 to 15 kilos over a whole car. It's just one of these things that kind of happens. Nothing you can do about it. But for a car to weigh in at 120 kilos under what the manufacturer claims, that's wrong. That can't be right, surely. Now, I have a little website that I use which lists many weights of different cars, actual real-world tested weights. And when I've been in a position to actually have a car weighed, I've cross-referenced that with what this site says, and generally it's pretty much accurate. They haven't got any weights even remotely close to what Harry got for this car. In fact, the last Boxster that they tested, which weighed in at really under 1,300 kilos, was the original 986. So I think something's wrong there. Scales do go out of alignment. That does happen. My guys at Thorny Motorsport said they had to get theirs recalibrated because they found that they were miles out. And it's very possible that that has happened. Harry's weights for the 911 was similarly a little bit less than Porsche claimed, and that just seemed a bit wrong. I don't think there's anything sneaky or underhand going on. I don't think Porsche are sort of sending out super light press cars to try and impress people. Nothing of the sort. But I do think he should probably get his scales calibrated. That I've chosen to mention for a very specific reason, because the weight of a car is something that isn't at all based on opinion. That's fact. Here's what the car weighs. And yet, I'm pretty confident Harry probably has got that wrong, because if Porsche are making 1,280 kilo Boxsters, I think they should advertise that fact. This is not meant as a dig against Harry. In fact, I picked him explicitly because I have so much respect for him and his integrity. It's merely my way of pointing out that even a seasoned professional can get the facts wrong, let alone an opinion. I've made plenty of mistakes myself. I just wanted to prove that we are all human. I've also decided today to take you on a little jaunt down memory lane. These are some of the roads that I used to ride around on when I was a little whippersnapper, 16-year-old on my moped, and in all fairness, I'm a little bit lost. But for the purposes of today's video, it doesn't really matter too much. I thought we'd just enjoy the drive. I am really grateful to Porsche for lending me this car, and in general, to be honest, I've actually really enjoyed working with them because, let's be honest here, I haven't been too complimentary about some of the cars that they have loaned me. I think I've been truthful and honest, and where I've not liked things, I've cited why, and Porsche respect that, and for that very reason, I really respect them. A lot of people talk about whether us YouTubers are afraid to speak our mind for fear of not being given another press car. Well, I can tell you now that when it comes to Porsche, I am not afraid of that at all. I'm not afraid of that really with any manufacturer. There is today only one that's thrown their toys out of their pram when it comes to something I've said, and it was not McLaren, and no, I'm not going to discuss more about it. Not today, anyway. With all the comments that came back from the Cayman GTS video, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to sort of explore the topic in more detail, talk about what handling, feel, all that kind of stuff really means. And also I wanted to give the car a second chance to have some more time with it. Now, I did explicitly ask for the Boxster and not the Cayman for a very good reason. First off, I'd hope for some sunshine, and that I've got, which is also going to counter anybody that says, well, I'm just driving the car in rubbishy conditions. Well, no, it's 12 and a bit degrees today, which is as good as we're going to get in March. The roads are pretty dry. I'm happy with this. This is decent. And I've also had plenty more time with this car. In fact, I've put over 200 miles on it from collecting it to recording this, because I wanted to make absolutely sure that I was confident with my opinions, that I was going to be absolutely happy with what I had to say. The other reason I asked for the Boxster is that I knew that this was going to be more or less equivalent to the Cayman, but crucially not the same car, which eliminates the possibility of something being wrong with that particular car that I drove. There may be some minor differences between the two, but honestly, in reality, nothing that actually is of any consequence. So, having now had some more time to drive the car, what do I think about it? Well, my opinion stands. It's a most frustrating car. There's a lot I really like about this car, and I want to make that absolutely crystal clear. This is not, I think, a bad car. But is it a bad Porsche? That's the interesting question, I think. Certainly quick enough. Yes, the gearing is a little bit long, but this engine also has a reasonable amount of punch. Would it be better with shorter gearing? For sure. That being said, I achieved this morning 37 to the gallon. Well, just shy of, actually, over 95 miles of motorway driving. For a 4-litre, 400 horsepower car that meets all the modern regs, that's damn impressive. I'm really, really in awe of that. Does sound pretty weird though, and I've noticed it's got an odd character, shall we say. Allow me to demonstrate. So I'm doing 30 miles an hour in third gear, and you can hear, I don't know how well it comes across, but at just over 2,000 RPM, which is generally where I am in town, the exhaust just makes an awful din. Yeah. It doesn't make a difference, by the way, if you've got the exhaust in sport or not. So it's in normal mode now. I'm going to put it in sport, and it will still do it, because at 2 and a bit thousand RPM, the valve is actually always closed. I've noticed a couple of manufacturers have mapped their exhaust valve this way, and it must be a consequence of the rules and regulations. My friend's McLaren 600LT is exactly the same. It's actually really frustrating, because at low RPM, it's loud, then it goes quiet, then it goes loud again. And I'd actually much prefer it if the car was just quiet until it got to like 4,000 RPM or whatever RPM it is that it's allowed to make noise at. It's just frustrating, and it just doesn't sound good. It's got to be said. At that speed, I think an exhaust would of course fix it. It's just a quirk, something I didn't notice in the Cayman, and you didn't really notice in this with the roof up. With the roof down, you certainly can. So that's a quirk. I've also noticed the fact that the handbrake doesn't really seem to turn on or off automatically, which is most frustrating, because it's not really in the easiest place to get to. It's also pretty much the wrong way around as far as I'm concerned. You pull it to turn it off. This means you wind up looking like a bit of a pillock in town, because the car has no parking brake as such in the gearbox, because it's a manual. An auto hold feature seems like something that would have been very obvious and very easy for Porsche to have engineered in, so why they haven't, I don't know. Also twigged the fact that this does not have Android Auto, and when I looked into it, I'm not sure that Porsche does at all at the moment. Apple CarPlay, this has as standard. The other option this car also has, which I don't think is actually on the spec sheet, or if it was, I missed it. This has the PASM suspension, standard on the GTS, but this one's only lowered by 10mm rather than the standard 20mm. So this car, in theory, should be even more comfortable than normal. So let's talk a little bit about some of the terms that I use when it comes to describing a car's dynamics, because there's quite a bit of confusion, and I think really we should clear that up. So The first thing that I want to say is that handling and grip are two separate items. A car can be pretty bad handling, but actually very grippy, in my opinion. Maybe the term I should use there is road holding and perhaps feel or sensation, but the terms get used somewhat interchangeably, perhaps when they shouldn't. So there's plenty of cars out there that I don't think really have great handling, but are very grippy. My old Subaru, as an example, just completely lifeless, no real feel to it at all, but it would stick to the road like the proverbial to a blanket. There are some other terms that I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with: understeer, oversteer. Understeer when the front end tends to want to wash wide in a bend, and oversteer when the rear wants to come out. Most road cars are engineered to understeer first, because it's safer. The front end kind of not turning as much as you'd hoped isn't anywhere near as dangerous as the rear suddenly coming out on you, because people's response is normally to panic, and once they do that, things will go wrong. I'm not a driving god. I'm quite happy with a car being engineered to understeer a little bit first. Some cars, it is actually a problem. For example, my neighbour's Audi R8. Lovely car, very capable, but does start to understeer much earlier than you think that it should. And that's pretty much a result of the way that Audi have kind of programmed it, essentially. The way they've set the suspension up, it's a very, very safe handling car. I think you'd have to be doing something monumentally stupid to get that car really out of sorts. Something like a Lamborghini, for example, even though it's more or less the same car, they tweak them a little differently, so it has a different feel, different handling characteristics. And this is stuff you can easily fix. Just get the car geoed properly and you're all golden. Geo, if you're unaware of the term, means your geometry, your alignment, making sure all the wheels point where they want to be. And when you're doing that, there's not always a right and a wrong. There will be the manufacturer specified way, which will be their correct way of doing it, but you can change and alter things, improve or make worse as you see fit. If you want to know more about something like that, or how your own car could be improved, speak to Center Gravity. They are absolute wizards when it comes to this stuff. They may seem expensive, but trust me, they're very good value for what they do. They will transform your car. Anyone that's been there, I'm sure, will completely agree. I've just got the S2000 back from there, and they've done some fabulous work with it. Let's then talk about the suspension on a car. So there's many different characteristics that a suspension will have. Now there are the basic ones. Is it comfortable? Is it not? And I think we pretty much understand what I'm talking about there. And then you can use words like compliance, because certain cars will have very different characteristics at low or high speeds. In fact, most will. But some alter more dramatically than you think. Quite a few sports cars at low speed may be somewhat jittery because the whole thing is set up to work when you're really pressing on. Classic example, my Lotus Evora 400, the Ford Focus ST actually that I drove recently, very good example as well. It's a little bit firm at low speeds. Once you start pressing on, the whole thing works. Once it gets some weight behind it, it actually is pretty decent. When I do these kind of videos, they don't always go to plan, and it's often only when I get here to the edit that I realise where I've gone wrong, because I've just mentioned suspension and compliance and a couple of basic terms, over and understeer, and I'm about to go off on a tangent, just to warn you. However, there's a big topic here I kind of missed out, and it's also something I didn't like about the Cayman and the Boxster, which needs explaining. That word compliance that I talk about, it means how well the car rides on the road. Suspension design, like everything in cars, is a matter of getting your balance right. If you want a nice, comfortable luxury car, of course you want a fairly soft suspension. Now, a soft suspension naturally is going to have a lot of travel, which means the car needs to be higher, which means your center of gravity is higher, which means its natural inclination is to want to roll a little bit more, and that sort of stuff is not very good in a sporty car. However, if you then go the other way, you lower the car right down, you make it really stiff, or you have to make it stiff because the suspension no longer has far to travel, well, that's also created a problem, because if the car is going over particularly rough surfaces and it doesn't have the suspension travel to cope with it, the car's just going to skip. Or, even worse, you'll reach the end of the suspension travel, and that's not a very pleasant experience. It means the car will actually sort of kick back against itself, and the whole chassis will become really unsettled. So suspension design really is a bit of a black art. You need to make sure the car's got just enough to be able to cope with pretty much everything that's going to be thrown at it and never be unsettled. All the while making sure your car doesn't look silly, because nobody wants to have a Boxster that's up on stilts because they've given it loads of suspension travel. There are ways to kind of deal with this, and some of the more modern technology that we have, adaptive dampers, so on and so forth, they have managed to improve things greatly. Once upon a time, you really just had to choose between soft or hard, and that was kind of it. Some manufacturers get the balance really, really right. So Lotus with the Evora, for example, as a sporty car, that works very well indeed. Others, not so much. At Maserati, as an example, their adaptive dampers, the Skyhook system, never really worked that well. You have to bear in mind too that the damper is adaptive, but the spring is fixed, and the two do work together. There's quite a few places out there like Birds who believe that adaptive dampers really aren't worthwhile in a sort of sporty car because all you're doing is just having the wrong setting for the damper most of the time. Of course, you want to speak to them about their sort of stuff. They're experts in BMW and other things. Do go and have a chat with them. So the issue with the Boxster, I felt, is that as you sort of picked up the speed, there's just a little bit too much of the firmness left in it. And where that presents as a problem is in certain fast sweeping bends, which have sort of, say, tree roots or things under them, or breaks in the tarmac, the car will get lifted up off the surface. And then if you wind up getting air, if the wheel is not firmly in contact with the ground, it's going to start to move, and it's going to start to skip and do that kind of thing. That's not really something that you want. That's quite bad, and the Boxster did that. Certain other Porsches have done it in the past, some of them don't. So the old 996, that's actually a reasonably softly damped car, the regular Carrera. That's really, really decent. Other cars, you'll find them be a bit too firmly damped, and sometimes there are other solutions. For example, the 991.2 GT3 RS has a helper spring in it. So that's actually two springs on top of one another. One is actually fairly firm, and one is sort of a much, much smaller, and I think could be firmer again or softer. I don't know the way it goes around. I'm not a suspension expert, probably obvious by this point. But the idea is that you can then have, if the one suspension spring is completely compressed, rather than just hitting, a piece of solid rubber or metal or whatever, you've got a secondary spring just to sort of take the edge off. Renault use the same thing in the current Renault Sport Megane, and it does actually make a big difference. Also, as another way of suspension designers being able to sort of, make a car a little bit stiffer, a little bit more controlled, but also not losing a little bit of that compliance, a little bit of that sort of softness to make a car livable. Because if you are going to daily drive it, use it on the road or whatever, that's kind of important. So that was one issue that I had with the Boxster and Cayman. I just felt that for a road-biased car, the suspension settings were just always just that little bit too stiff, and I just felt on some of my favourite roads the car wanted to just skip a little bit rather than working with the road surface. So yeah, anyway, back to the video. This car, as mentioned, has the PASM adaptive dampers. I've been driving in both modes, and honestly, for the road, normal is the one that you want. Sport just makes things far, far too fidgety. Now, Sport mode does also alter the throttle response, and I mentioned in the previous video with the Cayman that I felt it was too responsive, and a lot of people took issue with that. A throttle can't be too responsive. Well, yes, it can. If you have a throttle that just wants to go from sort of 0 to 100 very, very quickly, that's a bad thing. I don't like that at all. What you want is a nice linear throttle pedal. So at 0% pedal is 0% throttle, and 100% pedal, 100% throttle, or something vaguely like that. It's very handy in higher powered cars because once you start getting up through the rev range, it gives you even more control over exactly how much power you are going to be metering out. What the hell are you doing down this road? Oh, a little backstory. I used to drive this road all the time on my moped, and I actually used it for some of my early reviews. This is what I called my my hatchback test route. If you know what this road is and where it goes, don't tell everyone in the comments section because you'll ruin it for everybody. You can see just there an excellent reason of why I don't really use this road anymore, because it's entirely unsuited to big, wide, fast cars, but has some excellent little pieces of tarmac that really do test a car, and it must be said, a driver too. The throttle response in normal mode is absolutely fine. There are no issues with this car whatsoever. The engine is great, the gearing, and not so much, but the gearbox, beautiful, really good to use. So one of the problems I think I had with the throttle response previously is the fact that in Sport and Sport Plus mode, the car wants to rev match for you. So I was changing gears trying to heel and toe, and basically I was pressing the throttle at the same time that the car was, which was producing this massive flare of revs and didn't really sort of work very well. So that was partly me getting things wrong, partly the car being annoying. But actually I will say on its behalf that it does get the rev matching bit done fairly well. Go on fella, go on. Now it's a road like this where this kind of car should really, really shine. But unfortunately, this is also the kind of road that shows the weakness in this car. So let's talk about those twin things that I really didn't like about this car: suspension and steering feel. Now the suspension, remember I was saying about how some cars, they do develop a level of compliance. Well, this starts getting there. As you start pressing on, you get to the sort of legal limit on this road, which is 60 miles an hour. It begins to get a little more compliant, but there's always an edginess about it. It never really flows with the road. Now, if you're still out there screaming at me, thinking, James, you pillock, you know nothing about cars, well, do yourself a favour. Hop in either an old 993, of which I drove an example recently, or perhaps a McLaren. The best example maybe being a 570, and the 570 isn't a perfect car. Steering, some of the best ever, and damping very good, but once you start to press on just a little bit, beyond sort of 80, 90 mile an hour, so you're really starting to go for some, not that I do that on the roads obviously, but the rear end, very, very twitchy. In fact, McLaren even addressed that with the new Artura, and they acknowledged that is an issue, especially under heavy braking. The rear end just didn't want to stay put, so they've fixed that with their new suspension design. But in this, I feel like the suspension never quite gets to the place I want it to be. It never quite just works with this road. Now, in the Boxster Spider and the Cayman GT4, I'm sure it's much the same, I can almost forgive it, because those are cars which are really designed to have a somewhat of a circuit bias to them. They're still ultimately road cars, but very trackable ones. And broadly speaking, on track, you do want a bit of firmness in your car. The 718 GTS is certainly capable. This is a ruddy quick car, and it will get you down this road, no doubt about it. But it's at that point where this car should ascend from being merely very good into one of the all-time greats, where it just stumbles. And that is where the steering feel comes in. See, I took the 993 out the other day. Hopefully by now you'll have seen that review, and that car reminded me of just how brilliant Porsche steering can be. And that's the thing, when I'm reviewing these cars, you're benchmarking it really against a few things. First off, whatever the last car was that you drove, whether consciously or not, whatever you've got out of is going to dictate how you feel about what you're getting into. It's one of the reasons I'll always tell people if I've just jumped out of my S2000, I'll say, because then you'll know, right, okay, if he says this car feels really torquey, that could be because you took it out of a Honda with about 5 torques in it. The other thing you're always benchmarking a car against is the perfect one. So when I'm testing a luxury car, of course I'm going to be comparing the ride quality with the best in business. I'll be talking about a Mercedes S-Class, I'll be talking about a Jaguar, I'll be talking about a 7 Series. But when it comes to sports cars, I don't even have to look beyond the Porsche catalogue to find greatness. You take out a 993 or a 996 or even a 968, and then you tell me you think the steering in this Boxster is brilliant by comparison, because quite simply, it isn't. Now, there are other cars I absolutely love, some of my all-time favourites which also have pretty crap steering. The Ferrari 355s is just too light, the S2000s is artificial, and the E46 M3s is easily the most overrated of all time. Yeah, bite me. But with the 718, handling and therefore steering feel too is a part of the Porsche identity. I had extremely high expectations for it, and maybe that's why its deficits seemed quite so crushing. The steering feel for me is actually the most interesting of topics. Some people don't care about it whatsoever. I care about it greatly, as you can probably tell. It's divided into a few different areas. Now, firstly, accuracy, which I guess is not really part of steering feel, it's more the steering. And here's where the Boxster scores highly. And indeed, Mr. Metcalf said as such. He said this is very accurate, precise steering. And he's right. Where you tell the car to go, it goes. There is no play in this steering. There is no indecision about it. You turn the wheel, the car will follow. No complaints about that at all. But it's the other elements, the texture and the weighting. So the texture is exactly what you think it might be. It's that feeling through the wheel of the actual road surface. You should really feel, and that sounds odd, a grittiness through the wheel. That should be coming through. You should be informed at all times as to what the road surface is like. In the best of the best of the best of steering cars with honours, you'll get this absolutely sensational feel that will telegraph to you exactly how much grip is available, what that front end is doing, how close to breaking away it is, or indeed if it's broken away, how bad it was, what you need to do to correct it. It's all really, it sounds odd, it sounds like gumph, but if you've experienced it, you'll know that it's true, it's a thing, it happens. And the other bit is the weighting. And the weighting really is a key part of what a car is doing. Now, this is not something Porsche have got wrong for the first time in this car, because actually, if you go and read more or less any journalist's review of the 991.1, it's something they'll complain about, because they'll say that with all the things Porsche did to that car, you know, with the dynamic chassis control and all that stuff, they made it very capable, but they also robbed it of a lot of feel. And having driven a 991.1, they're absolutely right. You've got really no idea how close you are to something going wrong until it's already gone wrong. At low and medium speeds, this car's steering does seem to have a reasonably nice weighting to it. And I don't just mean that the steering is heavy, because weighting, it has to be a dynamic thing. You have to know through the wheel exactly how much force is going through those tyres. And here, it all seems fairly decent. You're sort of doing your low, medium speed stuff and everything feels fine. And then, just as you get to that point where you go, right, I'm having fun here, let's really crack on, that's when that feeling just evaporates. It just goes. The steering just goes quite light. And it's a shame, really, because steering, historically, the real Porsche strong point. I've generally found that the more stuff is added to a car to make it faster, anything that's called adaptive or dynamic seems to rob cars of just that little bit more feel. Go and read anyone else's review of a McLaren 650 or a 720, and they'll say that the steering isn't quite as good as in the 570, because it's not. It's still excellent, still very good, and this feels maybe like 12C. It's not bad steering, not at all. It's not quite as good as it has been. If I'm talking about a benchmark Cayman, for me, in terms of excitement and dynamics, probably actually the Cayman R. The GT4, the old one, was a very exciting car. It didn't have quite the steering feel of, say, the Evora that I had. In fact, very few things have the steering feel of an Evora. But it moved. It worked with you. There wasn't really anything adaptive or trick or clever in the chassis, but it was just really well set up. So it worked under you. You were the computer. You worked out what the car needed, and for that reason, it was a huge amount of fun. It was a properly engaging driver's car. This is a very good car. I'd like it a bit softer. What I think is normal mode, what is normal mode here, I think should really be sport mode. It should be a little softer, because honestly, there's no need for a sports car to be stiff. I've got a Ferrari F8 coming in a couple of days' time, and I'd be shocked if that rides as stiff as this does. Ferrari's actually pretty well damped, as are McLarens, as are Lotus, as are many other cars, because it's not really necessary. In fact, it ruins the road driving experience. I can see now why Ferrari and McLaren kind of refused to get involved in the whole, you know, lap time thing, because it's a bit pointless, really, isn't it? You know, what do you want to do that for? But I want to finish by underlining, this is not a bad car, not by any stretch of the imagination. It looks great. Okay, it sounds all right when you're pressing on. You can fix that. It's not a problem. The interior is pretty decent. Some oddities, though, like the handbrake. The fact that it's got red stitching everywhere, but not on the steering wheel. That does bug me. But generally, it's a decent package, and one I certainly prefer over the current 911. If I was going to have anything, I'd probably have the Boxster 25th anniversary, because it looks awesome. I'd change the suspension straight away, put something passive but good on it, and enjoy. So there we have it. There's a little video. I hope I managed in some ways to explain a few of the things that I talk about that mean something to me. If there's any you feel I've missed out, because there's probably loads, do tell me, and I'll be sure to address that in a future video. So thanks all for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.